The night George Pickens walked into the stadium to face the Raiders, nobody expected the performance he was about to deliver. The Cowboys had seen flashes of brilliance from him all season, sure, explosive yards after the catch, contested grabs that felt almost unfair, a physicality that made corners question their career paths. But this game? This game was something different. It was a masterpiece. A full-on, emotionally layered, violently graceful work of art from a receiver who has spent the last 10 weeks telling the NFL he's coming for the crown. And while Cowboys Nation celebrated the win, something bigger was brewing behind the scenes. Something far more complicated than a highlight reel or a box score. Dallas might soon be forced into a crossroads that fans hoped they'd never have to face, choosing between CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens in the years ahead. Jerry Jones didn't even try to hide his emotions after the game. He talked about Pickens like he was watching an opera unfold, the kind where the music builds, the lights dim, and the audience forgets to breathe. Jerry called Pickens' performance poetic, even a ballet. But beneath that praise lay a storm of cap concerns, contract timelines, and long-term roster implications that are already starting to swirl. Pickens is sitting at 908 yards and 7 touchdowns through 10 games in Dallas. That production is elite. That trajectory is superstar territory. That kind of output forces decisions. Dallas can tag him. Dallas can pay him. Dallas can gamble and trade the wrong guy. Whatever happens, the next 2 years might define the future of the franchise more than any single player can. But for tonight, Pickens refused to make the moment about himself. He credited his teammates. He praised the offensive line. He talked about spacing and timing, and he shrugged off his raw dominance like it was just another day at work. Meanwhile, he was stiff-arming defenders out of their cleats and dragging half the RA. He was stiff-arming defenders out of their cleats and dragging half the Raiders' defense for yards after the catch like a man possessed. But Pickens wasn't the only monster unleashed in Dallas. Quinnen Williams walked into his Cowboys debut looking like one of the best defensive tackles on the entire planet. It wasn't hype. It wasn't projection. It wasn't optimism. It was fact. 4 tackles. 1.5 sacks. 7 pressures. And a defensive line that suddenly looked like it had grown a new spine, heavier, nastier, more suffocating. Williams didn't just plug gaps. He destroyed them. He didn't just pressure the quarterback. He collapsed the entire pocket. Teammates like Jadeveon Clowney were already talking about domination for the rest of the season, about a level of physical warfare that Dallas hasn't consistently lived in for years. If this is the new identity of the defense, fast, violent, suffocating, relentless, then Monday night might be the moment we look back on as the turning point. Amid all the chaos, emotion, and brilliance on the field, Dak Prescott delivered something even more powerful once the game ended, a message rooted in heartbreak. The Cowboys are still reeling from the tragedy of losing Marshawn Kneyland. That pain doesn't disappear, not for a locker room that cared deeply about him and not for a leader like Dak who carries that weight on his shoulders. Prescott didn't sugarcoat the moment. He didn't pretend the team could simply move on. Instead, he spoke about turning heartbreak into fuel, not as a slogan, not as a media line, but as a real commitment to honor their teammate by playing with purpose. Dak talked about unity, emotion, and the idea that this season could become something special if they let the pain strengthen them instead of break them. Monday night felt like the first step in that journey. Dak controlled the offense. Dak steadied the energy. Dak made sure the identity of this team didn't fracture under grief. And now, Cowboys Nation sits at the center of a swirl of questions, some practical, some emotional, some flat-out uncomfortable. What happens when the cap crunch hits in 2027 or 2028? Do you choose the homegrown superstar in CeeDee Lamb or the rising alpha in George Pickens? Do you slap the franchise tag on Pickens next year and buy time, or push for a long-term deal while his value is sky-high but relatively predictable? And on the other side of the ball, did Quinnen Williams just walk into Dallas and instantly transform the Cowboys' defensive future? Is this defensive line about to become the identity fans have begged for? But maybe the biggest question of all is the one Dak inspired. can this team take heartbreak, pain, and loss, and turn it into a legitimate run? Not a hopeful run. Not a lucky run. A real one. A run driven by unity, by resolve, by leadership, and by players who are stepping into their prime at the exact same time. The Raiders game gave us a taste. A dominant Pickens. A reborn defensive line. A focused Dak. A team with something to prove, and something it refuses to let break them. And so we arrive at the crossroads. A franchise built on stars now finds itself staring at decisions that will define the next decade. A receiver who plays like a poet and fights like a warrior. A veteran quarterback carrying more than a playbook on his shoulders. A defensive lineman erupting into superstardom on night one. And a fanbase that has seen enough highs and heartbreaks to know the truth. Seasons like this don't come often. And when they do, they demand everything: clarity, courage, and commitment. Tonight, we dive deep into one of the most emotionally charged and strategically revealing games of the Dallas Cowboys 2025 season, a 33-16 domination of the Las Vegas Raiders. This wasn't just a football game. It was a response to adversity, a tribute to a fallen teammate, a debut platform for new stars, and a reminder that when this Cowboys team plays focused, connected, and disciplined football, they can overwhelm almost anyone in the NFL. Over the next 2 hours, we will break down every quarter, every adjustment, every standout performance, and the emotional weight behind the team's motivation, all while examining the tactical wrinkles that made this win possible. The Cowboys entered this matchup coming out of a painful bye week, mourning Marshawn Kneeland while also facing the harsh reality of a 3-5-1 record. Expectations were mixed, criticism had been loud, and pressure on Dak Prescott, Brian Schottenheimer, and the retooled defense was reaching its highest point. But instead of folding, Dallas responded with energy. They responded with urgency. And most importantly, they responded with purpose. Everything we're about to analyze starts with that sense of purpose, because the moment the Cowboys stepped onto the field, the emotional tone was unmistakable. This game was personal. Before kickoff, the Cowboys were already surrounded by storylines. 2 trade deadline additions, Quinnen Williams and Logan Wilson, were set to make their long-awaited Dallas debuts. 2 safeties, Malik Hooker and Donovan Wilson, were officially healthy and cleared. And 2 defensive players who had missed extended time, DeMarvionOvershown and rookie corner ShavonRevel, finally returned from their knee injuries. On paper, this was the freshest, deepest, and most balanced defensive rotation Dallas had fielded all season. But the biggest pre-game shock came from the offense. CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens were benched for the first offensive series after a coach's disciplinary decision. Schottenheimer wanted to send a message, and he did. The Cowboys still stumbled early, but the discipline paid off later, igniting the most efficient defensive performance in weeks. This is where our deep dive begins, with all eyes on how the Cowboys would respond to adversity, and how they would shape the tone of this game. The opening quarter was shaky and unpredictable. Dak Prescott stepped onto the field missing his top 2 receivers due to discipline. Dallas had no rhythm, no spacing, and no clear passing identity on the open